All right, about mobilization and the actions of recruitment commissions, there were a couple of controversial signals this week. One of them belongs to Fyodor Vinislavsky. He is representative of the president in High Council, and he is saying, if to summarize what his statement is, that for violation of human rights, the employees of recruitment organizations will be prosecuted because this is a serious issue. They should not be violating these laws. Simultaneously, Khmelnytsky Regional Recruitment Commission had made a publication that recording photo and video or audio of their work and spreading information about their movement and activities where they conduct their work will be, and then publication of that in the social media will be prosecuted for up to 8 years, 5 to 8 years in jail for that. So a mixed signal, right? On one hand, they need to follow the law and respect human rights, and the other signal is that do not record, do not follow them. Fyodor Vinislavsky probably expects them to repent themselves, I guess, that, hey, we were not recorded, nobody saw that, but we did make a violation here and there, and I think he expects them to come en masse to prosecutors and repent, as including those, by the way, who recently were added there as that you can use people with some mental issues, limited spectrum of mental issues, to be employed by those commissions. So imagine, all of them coming to DAs and saying, well, sorry, I did violate something, or I did make 17 violations today, please put me in jail, right? It's almost, they're insisting that there should be some sort of a special booth where the prosecutors are and those commission workers from recruitment and drafting offices should be visiting those booths regularly. Hey, I am sorry I have sinned, and DA would be cleansing them of their misdeeds. But joking aside, the situation people who work in those recruitment commissions, they're not in the best of their moral station right now. And it's somewhat an issue, a rather serious issue actually in the society. So how would you think it's better to address it if you had a chance to? Well, it's first premise I would say here, that mobilization that has been 6 months late cannot follow normal flow. We should have maintained a proper flow throughout the war, without pause. If somebody volunteers to go to war and expresses desire to go to a certain detachment, that should be respected. Volunteers should have a chance to go to the brigade that he or she wants to go to, where their friends are working. So, and instead, we have a lot of situations where company commanders and brigade commanders even come out and say, well, hey, we expected these people to come to us. They volunteered and they expressed their desire to join specifically our troop, but they were sent some other place, and it's almost impossible to reallocate them after. Another thing, military should not be the only people who are recruiting, who are providing this collection of souls for the war effort. It should be a mixed set of different entities. There should be police, there should be local authorities, and maybe military to a degree. Because each of them will be covering their interests and they'll be behaving more balanced, rather than one organization that can push harder without much oversight. Third, I would say we need to make sure the work actually flows in a normal, established way. If you get a volunteer who says he wants to go to 92nd Brigade, he needs to end up in 92nd Brigade. That's not what's happening now. And probably the summary of the whole appeal to make sure everything works better. I think people are so tired now in the country, And I think I know that they don't want to listen to any. If you take any of the employee of these recruitment commissions now and ask them, they would tell you, what do you want, guys? They gave us an order to fulfill the numbers that are being sent to us. Don't care about how. Our bosses give no damn about how we do it. They don't want to hear any excuses, and they don't care about the violations. So I would say the bigger question here is who dismantled our government to such a degree, our country management systems to such a degree that people are falling into depression, that things are falling apart. That's why you have Blinken visiting Kiev and mentioning elections several times. This is a very solid signal from the Secretary of States of one of our bigger partners. And they connect the crumbling of management with the leadership that our country currently has. They're just using diplomatic talk, but that's basically the message they're sending. Well, indeed, this is a strange story, Alexey. At first it was announced, it was planned, maybe it was a half measure, but not fully structured. But our government politicians were talking about it, Umerov was talking about it, and now it all led, and I think you have seen and you're aware of several cases when our acting military are telling to the volunteers who want to join them, who are saying, basically, wait, do not join, do not express your attempt to join our brigades, because we do want you, we need you, but we don't know how to ensure that you get in our brigade. So that reform apparently is not working. Right. Nobody knows how to achieve that. The system doesn't work. It should be holier than thou in the army. When a person comes to volunteer in a certain brigade, he should get there, because a volunteer is a welcome guest everywhere, especially in the army, especially on the third year of war. Is a super welcome guest, a motivated person who knows where he or she is going, and if we cannot help them get where they expressed desire to be at, this is the core breakage of a system. And these signals are increasing, like a statement today by a representative of a committee to make decisions without any rollback. So there is no way to change what the mistakes they've made. So we're looking at the breakage of core principles of army management. They're broken. The degree of rot in our society has reached even the basic principles of human rights in our country. And I call it a systemic catastrophe. It's only systemic measures that can address that. The full change of vector in politics. Systemic catastrophe leads to demoralization. Our executors are demoralized now. Recruitment officers, the guys on the front, many of the authorities, many of the bureaucrats refuse to sign documents. Some of them quit after 3 months of work, and if you pick their documents, what they worked on, there are no signatures. They're afraid for the consequences, for the decisions they've made. Our government machine is not functioning. And nothing but fundamental changes can address that. Smaller statements about, hey, what need the settlements and settlers do alongside the border, how should recruitment officers behave, you cannot fix that with recommendations. First, everybody needs to see that the government is actually addressing these issues on a highest level. And people need to see that the government, the whole country, is turning its face to its citizens. Without that, nothing's going to work. However, dictatorship, laws or initiatives you're going to initiate, people understand that this will not work. How many people drowned in Tisa just during the last couple of days trying to evade the Recruitment Commission, right? Several cases already. And I was in Berlin not long ago, was visiting their museum point, Checkpoint Charlie, and I was watching some video materials and pictures of those photos, people trying to cross the Berlin Wall from the east to the west. And what propaganda is saying, usually, is that how we present Germany is that people were fleeing communism to the kingdom of freedom, right, so to say. But Tisa is our Berlin Wall. It's a very difficult river, and people are running from here, from Ukraine to Europe. This is a direct analogy with Berlin Wall, in my mind. But back then, it was an escape from the dark kingdom into the kingdom of light, and now it is what? Why are we avoiding that similarity? That really touched me, that understanding, because that river is basically our second Berlin Wall. And that's how well we're managing the country. That should not be. Should not be so. Why? Who got the idea of capturing the cargo truck drivers? And now they're not going to work. Now all the cargo is stalled to a large degree. If it fully stalls, and by the way, the border was blocked before that, if that system stops working now, if these guys decide to stop working, our system will collapse even more. What idiot made a decision to recruit them? This is just as an important specialty as the driver at war times. Perhaps you're not in the front, you're not in the trench, but you're delivering important goods to the right points. This is a catastrophically wrong decision that needs to be remedied immediately. But the executors are just tired and in a despair. They're basically told, take everybody, including those drivers. And it's easier to get them at certain points, right? So that's what they're doing. Not a single military commissioner had thought beyond 2 steps here. What happens if they get all of these drivers and the trucks don't come? This will be a catastrophe of the huge scale. And now we got a bunch of drivers avoiding and not working. And then we have questions. Why? Why are we doing it, right? Same as we talked today about Kharkov and Sumy. Everybody knew about that. But people are not really calculating now. They're in such a desperate state that they're just making motions according with the orders from above, without thinking. The worst you can do with a human is to force him to stop thinking. And I think our government has reached that success. They don't think themselves and they preclude others from doing it. I have a question. I don't know if it's philosophical and whether it's appropriate for our stream, but still, Alexey, how do you think? How can that be that a person who built himself on a political satire, who was looking for errors and mistakes and was noticing everything rather keenly with other leaders and was playing that in jokes and comedy, had refused from a dialogue with society, a dialogue from brigades, a dialogue with army at large? How did it happen that the person is now completely shut off from that? Well, Nikolai, I would argue that there was not so much brilliance in him personally. He was working as an actor, following the screenplay. People who usually play and those who act are usually very different people. And now there are no screenwriters. And he still has an opinion that he is smart, strong, and knows how to do better. And earlier he had people who were advising and criticizing and could tell it to his face, but now he doesn't. So this is a recipe for catastrophe. And now mostly being installed new positions that are being fulfilled are with very weak executors in all spheres. Military, civilian, those new appointees, their main task is to follow the orders without thinking. And these are the cadre they're getting. Do you know the difference between the Western and the Soviet Union society? It's not about not yelling at your subordinates. In the West, especially in the army, they do yell at them too. But in the Soviet Union, there was no culture to say no. You could not resist. You could not express a different opinion. You could not say, no, it will not work like that to a higher person, higher in a bureaucratic ladder. And that's what the system is doing now. They're appointing people who will just follow their orders blindly. And this is another step towards a catastrophe. We have a crisis of federal management, a very serious, large-scale crisis, a fundamental size issue that is now reaching the core principles. You know, like a toothache. Could be some discoloration, could be carious, and could be a deep rot, where you need to remove some part of a rot, probably jawbone as well. And yeah, we currently have the jawbone crumbling. It's a catastrophe. Bankova 11, that's the address. That's where everything is coming from. All right, let's go to Blinken now. Perhaps it's time. Given all of these marks that we have expressed, they're not baseless. They're based on a lot of publications, including the Western media as well, Western press. So I have a question. How come that Secretary of State Antony Blinken can express confidence that Ukrainian troops can effectively hold the front on the east of Ukraine? How is that related? He is also lacking information, or he is making inspiring statements? No, he's making a compliment, first of all. There is a diplomatic protocol. You need to highlight the end goals of your visit, and then you also should address those things that you need to address in the middle. But there are some things, right? So he's following the protocol. He cannot speak out loudly like we do here. But look in general, the fact of his visit. A Secretary of State who has a lot of things to do back home, right? Africa, Middle East, Israel, other places, states themselves. When he drops everything, he goes across the ocean for 12 hours. He cannot even fly and land in Kiev. He has to take a train. It takes another day to get there, security protocols and all. This is a very alarming signal, just the fact of his visit. Diplomacy speaks a lot between the lines in omissions and things not said. I did not expect the word elections to be mentioned. It was. It's a signal for both us and for the West. He's basically saying everything is dependent upon the elections. This is the marks he's giving to the current political leadership of Ukraine. That's how he grades them. And expressing the surety in victory of Ukraine, of course, he will be expressing that, but you saw Victoria Nuland also mentioning this week that borders of 91 is a very difficult goal, should be approached in a complex. It's not an easy to achieve task. And right, Alexey, she also criticized the Western position about that. She's saying that the toughest countries in the world were taking a wrong position against China and Russia. They were trying to turn them into safe and secure and cooperative countries by adding them to economic system, which was a mistake made after the end of Cold War, and it was unfortunately permeating both left and right. That's what Victoria Nuland mentioned. But she is an ex-secretary, right? Exactly. So the ones who retired from their positions, they speak out much louder. They do not have to follow certain rules. If she would have said that while being in power, that would have been a serious catastrophe. But now that she retired, she can actually make this statement. Elizabeth Truss, who was briefly in power in Britain, she actually talks about the same things in her book. She was recently visiting American conservative circles, and she's saying exactly that. I analyzed one of her publications that basically was saying that same thing, that our belief that economy can change politics was a failed effort. It doesn't work. And the West is doing its homework. They're reviewing issues that they have. Even Democrats acknowledge that the biggest mistake of Clinton's government was to disarm Ukraine from nuclear arms. And I have a question here. Are we making our homework? Europe is making a lot of conclusions from this current situations. They're reviewing a lot of their basic documents now and basic concepts. You can see that in Macron and the others. And yeah, the West takes long, less than perfect, but they are making their conclusions. What about us? Yeah, Blinken sent another signal here, by the way, during his visit, that defense of Ukraine from corruption needs to be as strong as its defense from the foreign enemy. Right, these are the signals. Elections, corruption, these are the signals he is sending. And protocol statements that we will not abandon you, will be with you until the war is over. That's important. So he always says that. And if he wouldn't, our shares would have tumbled much seriously. So he's expressing that, and he's also reading between the lines. Elections, corruption, elections, corruption, corruption, elections. Look, I'm making my prognosis here, even ahead of May 21st. A lot of statements by ex-functionaries, ex-bureaucrats, right? Soon the real ones will be talking. The currently active ones will be discussing the same. Blinken is actually one of those. There'll be using less stern words, but they will be definitely expressing concern that it's most likely the inability of Ukrainian high leadership to deal with corruption. Then there'll be another slap in the face about joining the EU. Our president recently announced that we are going on a special program in line in the strategy to join the EU. You'll see what will happen with this program. Then there'll be a cold shower in the NATO meeting. Schmigel, our prime minister, said recently that we are awaiting to be invited to NATO. There will be no invitation. And there'll be basically will sum the defeat on EU and NATO lines for us, for political goals. Plus, there'll be a serious situation on the front, that same crisis we talked about earlier. Then there'll be more anti-corruption research and publications. And that's how it will be accumulating. And that's what we will be shown. We'll be given certain demands as well. Start fighting corruption for real, not putting slogans up, not capturing the ones who are responsible at the end, but figuring it up top. You need to address it from the head, not at the bottom. And that's how the West will be getting us, our leadership, into a certain funnel that will be getting tighter and tighter to make sure that they act on it. And that's what's going to happen in the near future. Now, to the signal from Dominic Cummings. I understand that he is the person who is an architect of Brexit. He's a political technologist, and there was a movie released recently where Benedict Cumberbatch is portraying him there. So, testing new political approach, Cummings organized a series of test groups and polling to understand what's the best angle to work against the establishment. He said that his party will be definitely representing human rights and his voters, and I'm seeing that his new party that he's trying to establish is anti-Ukrainian vector party. And what he's saying is that the West will fail supporting Ukraine. He started attacking the overall support of Ukraine on Thursday, and he had an interview recently. He did talk about his breakage with Johnson, and he said the West should not have fallen into such a trap. And he's saying that sanctions against Russia are affecting Europe much worse than they're affecting Russia. He is criticizing Zelensky in Ukraine. He is comparing it with the Second World War. And it is not a repetition of the events of the Second World War of 1940. He is not Churchill, and their corruption deceived us all, and then he goes with a lot of expletives about what needs to be done. So he is giving a very stern and pointed mark, and he's basically saying that the West are like clowns in the eyes of Putin, and he's attacking Ukrainian leadership, that we are ineffective here. And of course, he is on the extreme position. He is pushing it beyond the boundaries, frankly. The West has made a lot of money on this crisis, pushing Russia out of the nuclear industry, rerouting a lot of energy sources. So the West is making its profits on it. And the West also understood a new concept of threats, and the support to Ukraine by the West is not for nothing. This is a serious calculation. It is important. But the overall mark that he gives to Ukrainian leadership, I want to say that this is a tune that you can hear here in the West rather often. It is not yet in a public sphere, in the media, but even the top officials behind the scenes, they're talking about corruption, about issues that you can hear constantly. And these initiatives with limiting the rights and freedoms, that just stunned a lot of people here. Everybody is quite shocked with that motion by Ukrainian government. So the most polite of them would say something like, Ukraine somehow does not pose that it is interested in real human rights and real values that we do support here in the West. So, Alexey, another question. In Britain, apparently there is a trend, anti-war, anti-Ukrainian. So the main technologist of Brexit decided to saddle that trend and to set up a new shop on top of it. Right, yeah, that's what's happening. Although in Britain, one needs to acknowledge that they have the strongest support of Ukraine. And we, for the most part, can say that this is political technology, that this is his attempt to form a party around certain moods in the society. But he is making statements that they're sterner, that what you hear, but that's exactly what you hear about Ukraine and issues we have in other circles as well. Well, there is also another scandal or something in Britain, the message exchange between Trump and Cameron. Sunday and British Times have published that. So that was addressing the matter of what conditions would allow you to sign a peace treaty if you are the president in January of 25 after you possibly win the elections. That was a question to Trump. And the answer was when both sides are holding their positions and paying the price. And that's what Times are quoting from Cameron. That supposedly was their communication with Trump. Rishi Sunak commenting on the publication saying that he has not acknowledged that discussion and their position has not changed. Putin needs to suffer a defeat. Now, even more important as ever in this conflict, Russian dictator Putin needs to get all signals that we will be supporting Ukraine as long as it's needed. But still, there is no smoke without fire. The publication is there, the communication exchange is published, and Cameron also indeed met Trump. They met in person. So what is known? How real all that is? That Cameron is already talking about these separate negotiations opportunities looking forward, discussing Trump's actions if he gets to the post of president of US. I don't know if that was a real discussion or it was a fake, like the call to Makarevich from President Zelensky. But the fact is, one cannot ignore Trump. Trump is obviously going towards a victory in his elections, and people with foresight, they start working in advance. They talk with candidates and even with those who have very weak chances, as well as those who, like Trump, have very strong ones. And it's a good way to take a measure before they take post. Right, because Trump has already been a president who has a very good chance of becoming one again, and that's why they are discussing different things. The probability of such conversation is definitely there. The contents, that's under question, but regardless, that publication has nothing for Ukraine to worry, I would say, because people were peddling different narratives that he'll abandon Ukraine, etc. And there's nothing to be afraid of here. That he is going to support. He agrees that Russia needs to be talked to from the position of force. Now, the question of border is a wide question, of course. Borders are never stable. We had some illusion about their stability at the end of 20th century and beginning of 21st, but in reality, that usually is not a fact. That's why I do not see anything scary in this conversation. If Trump really thinks, as it was published, this is a very complimentary opinion for Ukraine, vector for Ukraine. There is some commentary, including Johnson's and some others, that if elected, Trump will most likely not renege on promises to support Ukraine. According to Wall Street Journal publication, he adapted to pro-Ukrainian moods that permeating his party now, and they're analyzing different options for him how to act. And this is an interesting story for them too, because the United States is sort of in war with Russia. Does it sound the same thing in US, that Ukraine is a proxy of states and Russia is a proxy of China? Well, Nikolai, in American circles, there was a different opinion that Ukraine was a proxy of Democrats, not the proxy of the country at large. But now this opinion is changing, starting to change, because they also have an issue with China. And they understand that one thing is to deal with China, another thing is to deal with the union between China and Russia. That's why Russia needs to be weakened. And who is the main weakener of Russia? They understand it now. Most circles already got this idea, and they're changing this approach. And the fact that they voted for this bill, this is definitely a sign that they do understand. And even Republicans and Trump surroundings started to assess that adequately. And there was a publication in the Telegraph this week that China is using Putin. There were interesting grades there. China is using Putin as the useful idiot against the West. Russia is becoming the vassal of China. And the overall message was that Russia is no longer a subject, only while it's in orbit of China. Well, Nikolai, where Putin is going after his so-called re-election? To China, right? First visit is to China. Where did Chinese leader go before that? To talk to Macron and the like, right? So here is the split of visits that tells you whom to believe and what's happening. Xi Jinping, before meeting Russia, had consultations in the West, understanding the West. He is ready to talk to Putin, and Putin was standing by waiting to be received. So this is the order of things. Nuclear power cannot be a full proxy, right? But there is a huge degree of dependency of Russia from China. And it's beneficial for China. It's that principle of a dumb ram, right, who is running at the gates, and China is looking and filming that, saying, well, if he breaks, I'll pile on, and if he dies, I'll say that was a funny show, I was just here to record it. Some people also see that Russia is posting a certain price tag for the meeting between them and Xi Jinping. And there are rumors that Chinese delegation will not be attending the Global Peace Summit dedicated to the matter of closing and ending the war between Russia and Ukraine. That's what Putin's aide Ushakov stated recently. Interfax is quoting him that we value the smart position of our Chinese partners to not participate in the international conference organized in Switzerland about the peace formula of Zelensky. That's Putin's visit will occur on May 16th, but it looks like that price is priced forward for the next tag in Switzerland. Don't know about the reality of this price, but it's interesting that Russia is talking for China. From the point of view of diplomatic protocol, this is a big mistake. It is only China that should be talking about their decisions to participate or not participate. So I think Chinese have already got used to their Russian partners who are difficult to control. And Russia, as I mentioned before, is a huge factory to produce the coolness factor, visage, facade to the partners everywhere. In reality, they're not what they produce, or they pretend to be. Regardless, Alexey, about that future conference, the Peace Summit, Minister of Foreign Affairs of Switzerland published that it will be not only Zelensky's formula that will be reviewed there, there'll be other suggestions discussed. They're not clarifying which ones, but the framework is said to be wider. So this Peace Summit, despite having so-called a role of driver for Ukraine, apparently the agenda will not be set only by Ukraine. The question is by whom? Not only by Ukraine, Nikolai, but as always, smart people and reasonable people usually have several plans how to stop the war, how to reach peace, and gathering to a unique event where we have half the United Nations countries would probably make sense to have several different proposals on the table to address and discuss that. That doesn't weaken the summit, that actually makes it stronger. If Erdogan's formula, Zelensky's formula, and somebody else's formulas will be reviewed, not only will help to produce real marks, real understanding of current events. This is a big step forward to future negotiations that will happen sooner or later. But there'll be better logic discussed, pro and cons of different aspects. So if it is so, if that's what's going to happen in Switzerland, that means that the contents of this meeting become stronger. It somewhat washes out the position of the Bankovая Street because they are still pretending that they're the ones who are the sole presenters of initiatives, but otherwise it's good. It's a good attempt to solve real problems. It's fantastic when people gather in such large numbers and large representation from different countries to address that big issue. All right, Estonia, serious discussion about sending their troops to Ukraine to conduct operations away from the front. They're discussing options to take functions of logistics, supplies, to allow more Ukrainian troops from those positions to be moved to the front. There's no decision yet, but aide to the President of Estonia on national security has made the statement recently. So Estonia would prefer to make such a step as a part of a NATO mission to as well reveal the overall support to Ukraine, but he is not excluding the probability that Estonia will do it directly with Ukraine. So what it tells me is that there are different discussions there, not only on the NATO level, but also between the countries, between us and Estonia, that if NATO decision doesn't come through, Estonia can still act on it with us, right? Yes, this is a good signal, and Estonia is a member of NATO, however you look at it. And now we're discussing the first NATO soldiers, not some consulting specialists, but real detachments, their probability of being here in Ukraine. And that could be a window of the overtone that Estonia will delicately open. And after that, it'll be easier for the others after that precedent takes place. So this is a very strong signal. We'll see who, when, how, but if it says it's inevitable, that it's a good perspective. Also, let's dedicate a little bit of time to the signal from Poland. Wiadomości published political games instead of marches. Second, in the Ministry of Agriculture, Mikhail Koledziejczyk said that the negotiations with Kiev are interrupted because we're not going to negotiate with people who are accused in corruption. I think he refers to the detaining of the Minister of Agriculture, Osolski, due to corruption matters, and we will not negotiate. That's a strong statement, right? That's a slap in the face. Uncomfortable one. Right, indeed. They're waiting for appointment of a new person who will at least formally not be entangled with corruption scandal. And I think we had a minister from Sweden visiting Kubrakov, and it takes them 16 hours to get here to Kiev. And when they got here, they figured that the news came about that the minister is already arrested and removed. So this is the way they often do that. They choose not to do with certain motions, certain agreements, because, hey, it's not because of us. We actually wanted to go forward, but there's corruption in Kiev. In reality, they didn't really want to discuss that much and change that, but we are providing perfect excuses. That the blame is on us. Yeah, but it's also happening on the eve of elections to European Parliament, right? Right. Well, look how quickly problems with farmers were done with when it was time to supply arms across the border. Suddenly, all the protests of farmers disappeared. I guess Americans explained rather quickly to farmers and the Polish government what will happen if the arms will not be able to cross the border. And all the protests disappeared, right? Subsided. So NATO still has manageability of its members. A larger question is what's with our manageability in Ukraine. About the manageability in Russia. As some commenters are talking, Putin is making strategic changes. He appointed Belosov as the head of War Department, as the Defense Ministry. He's a technocrat economist, not a cadre military. We recently interviewed Alexey, a Ukrainian analyst who is giving a grade to Belosov that he is the carrier of economic ideas. He understands the difference between economic modeling and different scenarios, and he is basically saying that Putin is appointing a person he trusts as the carrier of certain economic ideas to fulfill his mission in the Ministry of Defense, essentially turning Ministry of Defense into a new driver of economic growth. Do you think it is a strategic decision? Do you think Putin is in such a framework when he is fortifying himself and Ministry of Defense and is doing that in the logic of economic ideas? I would remove the wording about making it stronger. This is definitely a strategic decision because military-industrial complex is the driver of Russian economy now. But according to the grades of Russian experts, it reached its ceiling. And a serious question here that they're trying to solve, can they lift the ceiling higher to add more productivity? And they need to also bring it to order because on one hand it drives the Russian economy, but on the other hand it eats up a lot of resources that is also rather corrupt. And today they took the head of Department of Ministry of Defense, one of the tasks of his group was anti-corruption activity, and he was taken for a bribe. So they're seeing issues there, and they're trying to address them. This fellow will need to audit what's happening in front of him, understand the layout, which clans and groups of people are enriching themselves on the government funding that should have gone to produce more, and overall the system of military-industrial production, what is being stolen, where. So I think that's the push to understand and cleanse this area. Many commenters said that this might be a reflection of Putin's understanding and getting prepared for the longer war. I would agree with that opinion, because it definitely looks like one, and it is not a good signal for us in the West, because if they're readying themselves up for the prolonged war, we should be ready for that as well. And I'm quite optimistic about the West, because they are pumping up their military industry. But I'm curious about us in Ukraine. We're barely going to conduct this mobilization effort now. What about the next one when comes 2025? I have serious concerns about our capability to do that. And this is where we are sort of a weaker link for a longer warfare. But I see good signals for us too here. When The Economist is being put to lead the Ministry of Defense, that implies that whatever is happening in the Ministry of Defense is acknowledged to be very ineffective, with super high expenditures. And I don't think such an expert specialist as Belousov can handle that. This is a part of nature of Russia and many post-Soviet countries. So I read that as a signal of a serious issue in their industry and attempt to fix it. Perhaps even Hail Mary scream, sort of. Many people are saying that this is an attempt to make things better. I'm saying that this is an acknowledgement of how bad things are. So there was another set of publications this week that Russia is recruiting citizens of different countries to fight on the front in Ukraine. And they counted at least 21 countries of the world where people were recruited from. Recently, it came to the news that Russia got at least 35 citizens of India to the front, and some news were coming from India that they detained 4 people who were deceiving young men. And they were promising profitable jobs, studies in universities, and when they ended up there, they were sent to the front to fight on the side of Russia against Ukraine. So the fact that, for example, India is fighting with this revealed the method, the criminal network that was facilitating that. And the overall situation when Russia is trying to recruit people, even deceiving them to get to the front. Does it tell us that Russia also has issues with mobilization? And it's cheaper for them to attract some strange people around the world and bring them via different criminal schemes and deceive them and defraud them and bring them to the front than conduct mobilization among their own people. Right, mobilization is very not desired in Russia. The volunteers do not come there automatically. Every time they push a lot to get the next 30,000. Funny thing is, Russian propagandists are screaming that they're conducting a holy war for holy Russia against the West, Kingdom of Darkness. And it's only the hired guns fighting this war on the Ukrainian side. But wait, 21 countries from different places. The Indians and Nepalese are fighting for holy Russia? So mobilization is very hybrid there. They use all kinds of sources, including from other countries, including by fraud. So they are getting people, but one cannot say that it's an automated flow. Every time, as you can see, this is a very tricky set of efforts to get people when they have to even deceive not only their own citizens, but even citizens of other countries. And if you have to deceive people to get them to war, then first of all, it's a sign that, yeah, there are a lot of idiots there. And second, that not everything is good. They're not yet recruiting Chinese citizens. That would have been probably a disaster for them, but perhaps at some point they will. I think Chinese are smarter. They just won't go. There was some reporting about Chinese being there. Yeah, but those were more on the volunteer side. There is some Chinese equipment, though. They have Chinese equipment on the front. All right, we would want some commentary about understanding the process related to Makarevich, for example. I think it is an important event when Makarevich is being prosecuted in Russia, and he is being declared as a wanted person on the territory of Russia. And I guess his, even though a prank conversation with Zelensky is being used for that. And also Miron Fyodor, also known as rapper Oksimiron, who is a rather cultural protest figure in Russia. Looking at the law of the foreign agents and this persecution, what does it mean for us? You know, Nikolai, everything good that was done in the history of humankind was done by small groups of people. Andrei Makarevich has a good lecture about that. Very small groups, 5 to 10 to maybe 15 people. They were changing people's view on the world, about understanding the universe, about laws of the universe. And they were changing cultures and society. In Russia, they're very traditionally repressing small groups, by the way, as in Ukraine. Small groups that have their own point of view, that can communicate it. We systemically repress these groups, and they do that as well. I think this is a birthmark of post-Soviet countries. And in Russia, small groups, one way or another, and even bigger groups, have to define their position about the war in Ukraine. There were people who expressed their anti-war position. Some of them were killed, some of them were jailed, some of them were got rid of, some ran away from the country. Makarevich had enough resources that he had, and also a chance to emigrate to Israel, to leave Russia for Israel, as well as Pugacheva, Basilashvili, Akhidjakova. A lot of cultural figures in Russia found a way to leave the country and to express their position. And that once again shows that people are not equal to the government. And however our citizens do not like all Russians, hate all Russians, there are a lot of those who are still fighting against Putin and his war. And as long as these people exist in Russia, nothing is lost. And if Oksimiron, a cult figure for Russian younger society, younger aged people, is now being wanted, that means that among youth they have people who also are rather anti-war. Because the previous propagandist push in Russia was that it's old people like Makarevich and Pugacheva who are only against war. But how old is Oksimiron? I think he's in his 30s, 38 maybe. He's a bit younger than me. Right. I have seen some measurements, some polling in Russia, that youth in Russia did not really care about the 9th of May holiday, so that popularity is dropping. And they also do not appreciate war and government politics related to that. So kids who grew up in the era of internet, they know English, they can look at things from different points of view, even though it takes VPN to do that. They treat government goals and attempts to do things rather cynically. They understand that the government wants them to go and die there, and they don't want to be the pawns. So regardless of how often they're dressed into military uniforms at school and whatever is brainwashing being expunged on them, they do not support it. And that war is the war of the generation that's going. Those people who are somewhere between 40 and 60, who lived their lives through the breaking of Soviet Union, who saw different things, who still remember the greatness of the country that fell apart, and in an attempt to rewind things back and return back to a position of a simple world of their youth, they somehow ready to die in thousands in the muddy ditches of Attrition. Not all of them are like this. There are smart ones too, who understand Russia as part of Europe, part of the West, and who think that Russian path is to become a normal European country, and in relation to the rights of humans as well. And there are a lot of people like that among youth, among people of the middle age too, who demonstrate their non-acceptance of this vector that Putin's administration is pushing. So there is hope for the fact that things will change in Russia in 10 or 15 years. But in order for them to change, you always need those people who are holding the torch, who are not hiding it, who are using and holding it as the shining light, as a beacon. In earlier days, we had moral authorities. These days, we don't really have them, but at least some of these cultural figures, they serve as beacons. And it's a great fact that we have people like Makarevich. Youth may not be listening to his songs, but they understand that he is not a simple citizen. Oksimiron is another big figure for them, so very important factor. A lot of other cultural figures collapsed, though. The singer of group Animals, Zveri, for a while, I think he's also ethnic Ukrainian, for a while he was expressing in a quiet way some statements against the war and was quiet. But I understand after a discussion in an office of KGB or Don Rebe, he all of a sudden is in Donbass supporting troops. So you can see a lot of different things, right? Remember that nude party that they had in Moscow, when all of a sudden the organizer, who before said Putin go F himself, after that, after a scandal, all of a sudden she is in Donbass supporting troops too. So I'm glad there are people who are not afraid of Putin's regime and people with Russian passport who are expressing their position against Putin. And I'm not saying this is as high words or something. No, I think they will have a mark in the future history. Future historians will be writing that 70% were supportive of Putin and they were losing their mind over the propaganda and all, but there were certain figures who resisted and there would be names, and history will remember their names. And it's important that some people can look in their face in the mirror and not feel ashamed. Remember how people were laughing at Makarevich's song, "Do not bend over for the world, one day the world will bend for you." And there were some people pushing back saying, oh no, he's a very conformist singer, why is he singing that? Well, when the shit hit the fan, he actually is not conforming, he's holding. Tell me, Alexey, you mentioned small groups that Russia is repressing. What do you think Kremlin is afraid coming from these small groups? What examples of behavior is Kremlin afraid of? Well, Kremlin is afraid that these groups will reveal or point that the king is naked, that all this propaganda is a stupid and primitive effort to dumb down people. There are always appearing alternative points of view from smaller groups. And the principle is simple, right? Remember that story about a little boy who said the king is naked when everybody were expressing their admiration at his new dress. And that's the goal, that's the purpose of smaller groups. When especially fear, propaganda, all the dirt being thrown to people, that they can see that things can be different. Sometimes just one person is enough. You can bring different examples like Nelson Mandela or Gandhi, who pointed differently. Martin Luther King became another beacon in a different part of the world, right? Or one very unsuccessful politician. You know who was the most unsuccessful politician in the known history? 13 times participated in elections, 12 times lost. Abraham Lincoln was the most failing politician, the example of failure. But when he finally succeeded, he changed the world. In Washington, when you approach Lincoln's monument, you can feel it captured the scale of that person. You can feel that. And you read his speeches, etc. One person can change the world. If we have Makarevich, Pugacheva, Akhidjakova, if they were at the time available, and these figures that are still acting today, they're saving people's sanity, they're helping people understand. They're like those people in Inhabited Island by Strugatsky. There were several people who were not affected by the emitting towers, and they were the ones who actually ultimately changed the destiny of this island. So kudos to those. Kudos to Makarevich, to Oksimiron, and the like, who are not afraid to resist the crowd, to have their own point of view, and to defend it, and to point the deficiencies, and who have enough strength to explain how it can be different. The whole history of humanity was set by people who are showing that it could be different, starting with intellectuals who are showing that, hey, a different point of view is possible, and down to people who actually were leading, getting this torch and leading others after them. Right. That, by the way, pushed Oksimiron to publish another track, and his fans are writing in funny comments that thank you to prosecutor's office, they ignited new creativity with Oksimiron. Now he's back releasing new singles. Right, when he is being acted against, I guess his creativity spikes. The new track is called World on Fire. All right, one last publication that I wanted to touch today to comment upon is publication from Egypt. Strange to discuss it, but it appeared, and it is from Egyptian press that analyzes that the epoch of short wars is disappearing, and now we're facing an epoch of protracted warfare. And Egyptian politologist is describing how leading political powers and countries in the world are affecting each other, doing harm to each other without direct confrontation through proxies. And he's calling that wars for exhaustion, wars of attrition. Do you think there's something behind that? What's your view on this? Well, you know, every ultra position is always wrong when you take a thesis and take it all the way to the extreme. Just like Protestantism and Protestant ethics, that only Protestants, they're always the leading countries in capitalist world. Not exactly so. Have you seen Bavaria, BMW, and other companies? That's all Catholics, for example, not Protestants. And capitalism was invented in Italian city-states where everybody was fanatic Catholic. And in the United States, oh my God, there are more Catholics than Protestants, right? And in Holland, there are more Catholics than Protestants. So Protestantism as the super working idea that these are the hardworking people, this is more of a principle pushed to an absolute, which is wrong at this point. Gumilov, for example, and being a passionary, not exactly, right? So all these articles, I think the politologist here takes a factor that he observes that a lot of wars are indeed carried out through proxy efforts. But has it been different ever? Angola, China, Latin America, Cold War. On one hand, we have a trend continuing. On the other hand, they're renewing a bit. Big countries start to clash in Europe. This is not a protracted war. It could be a war of attrition. It could be a lengthy conflict, but I don't think it is a correct observation, correct conclusion. The observation is correct, yes, the war tends to last longer, but I think the conclusions are wrong out of it. We have one of the biggest continental wars in Europe. The conflict is expanding, NATO is getting involved, Belarus and Russia are threatening some countries. We don't know what will happen after Estonians are thinking about joining us. NATO troops are looking to come to Ukraine. It's difficult to call such war a war of attrition with the front of 1,300 kilometers. There is a trend, but to sum everything up as that trend would not be correct. It's always a symphony. It's not an extreme single player. Different factors. Thank you, Alexey Nikolaevich, for that stream. Once again, we remind everybody that we are conducting a fundraiser under the description of that video. Today, we're raising money for 67th Brigade for their military intel. We're helping to gather money for Mavic 3T. Please join. No donation is too small. Your support is vital. And we shall see you next week. End of part 2. Have a good day.